Okay, welcome to the Policy Subcommittee. It's Tuesday, August 8th, 2023. Could we have the roll call, please?
Mr. Agia?
Here.
Mr. Bailey? Mr. Hart?
Here. Salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made whether perceived or unperceived by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. Is there any citizens' input?
There is not.
There's not, okay. So we'll go to the first item for discussion and vote to refer, 3.02. I think you guys want to go into that, please?
So the first group of policies here is similar to what we went through in the last subcommittee meeting. There are a number of policies that have either had their language changed in very minor ways. It either updates a legal reference because the law has been changed, it updates a reg because a reg has been changed, one of the mass regulations, or it changes language from he, she, his, her to their, just to make it neutral so that there's no language that's potentially controversial. These policies all just update existing policies with some minor changes. Minor grammatical changes, an example I would give is one of them that refers to confidentiality, and it's changed to the word legal confidentiality, meaning a document that's required to be kept confidential. So it doesn't change the language or the intent of the policy, and that is in the first group of policies that's there, beginning with GBA and ending with KDD on the second page.
Anyone have one question, sir?
So when we went, this is the last time we were here, we had not gone through it. You recommended this?
Yes,
Like, you've,
we've gone through it, we've met as a team, reviewed. We actually separated those that had minor grammatical changes as well as those that needed some discussion, which, as reflected by the agenda, we've met as a team and gone through them. These are the ones that were absolutely
so I'm good with the ones that are in the language, so on the agenda where it lists.
the first set.
So I'll make a motion to go forward the first batch of them, and then we can discuss the other ones. I
Yeah,
think that
absolutely,
makes
that's
sense.
what we would expect, yes.
It's just all under the same agenda, so that's, if we
Instead of
approve
listed as
302,
Yes, yes.
then,
I agree with you.
so up
Oh, the
to
first item, you're saying,
KDD,
yeah,
make a motion to approve.
Right.
Seconded, the roll call?
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Mr. Hart?
Yes.
I see what you're saying. Should have been listed as separate.
Right.
agenda.
Do you want to go with, now with the ECA to LBC?
So the second group of policies here are policies that have a change that I just want to call the subcommittee's attention to, and if need be discussed or make changes or alterations before forwarding to the whole committee. The first policy is ECA. As you can see, the format we've taken for you is the recommended policy from MASC, and then the existing policy as it stands in our current policy manual on the second page. You'll note that in the first four bullets or so of the paragraph, there is no change. It just says MASC updated 2022. There's no change to that language. However, in the original Fall River policy, we had items 1 through 6 that we had added that were approved by the committee in 2017, and I felt that those were all pretty common sense security measures that the committee would want to keep in the policy. So the suggested policy would be policy ECA, including the 6 items from the Fall River policy, and that's the policy as recommended.
There's a yellow page that separates.
Gotcha. All right, are there any questions?
Yes. So what we're seeing in yellow is the only thing that's changed, is that?
Well, their policy is shorter. We had added those bullets in the previous policy. We want to continue to keep those in the policy. That's what we're saying. We feel like ours is more comprehensive, so we added that to the language that they're proposing.
So I guess I'll make the same comment I made the last time of just confusion or maybe a suggestion as we move this forward to the full committee. If I'm looking at the yellow, so now we know this is the, so we have one page that says MASC updated 2022, and then page 2 it says approved 11/17. So I'm assuming that both of those were in effect, even though one is dated 2022.
That's the one that MASC suggests, which just says that it's been reviewed and updated in 2022. But if you look, the language on that first page is no different than the language above the numbered items on the second page. So we're just suggesting that you include the numbered items, which are just those security measures that the committee will.
Right, but like I said the last time, this is the Fall River Schools policy book, not MASC. So it gets confusing, at least to this member, when we're saying the MASC updated 2022 is what
Right.
we have here. What we're saying is it's no different than what we already had in place for our school committee policy dated 12/11/17.
Right, so we're
So why
proposing to
even
keep
have
it
this?
as is. The MASC updated their language, we're proposing to keep our policy the way it was. We've reviewed our policy, we think that we need to include the 6 bullets in there, we're proposing that we keep that.
But why
as a
even
part of
put
it.
this is my question. So I'm just trying to simplify it. So if what is in the first page says MASC updated 2022, that exact language, based on what Mr. Coogan just said, is in our policy already.
Right, is included in our policy.
Right. So as far as I'm just trying to streamline, this is gone because that doesn't mean nothing, because we already had the policy here with our bullets. The second page now that says we want to add the policy, keep the policy, this policy doesn't even need to be on the agenda, the way I'm seeing it.
Right.
Is that,
You-
if there's nothing different than what's in our current policy,
The only-
then what you're recommending, why are we going through this? Like, why are we going through this stack? We would just say, we're keeping the policy as is.
The only thing I would suggest is that we reference that we updated the policy, that we reviewed and updated the policy as of that date.
That's fine. So then the page that just says, we're comfortable with the, to me, just being honest, this part isn't altered language to the degree that they need to be reviewed by the committee for referral to the full committee. This, what we just did in this first one, doesn't need to go to the full committee because it's not altering language. It should be in the, all we're doing is updating the date to say that it was reviewed and we want to just keep the same policy. That's what I'm hearing, just based on what you just said. We basically going to keep the policy that we had.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's just that by taking the policy that they recommended in 2022 and inserting the information that we went from
Under
2017.
what law, rule, or whatever, do we have to take every policy that they recommend and put it into like a meeting, paperwork, a policy book, or anything? Under what standard, or what, are we only doing what they want, or do we do what we want?
Well, we're not only doing what they want because we have our own policies and you're gonna hear about a couple of policies that we're adding to our policy book. I think it's important for us to use MASC as a resource because it's all these policies are vetted through from a legal standpoint, right? So we wanna make sure, and we need to be internally be checking our existing policies and updating as needed. I think that even when they just change the language and say updated, that anything that's updated that changes, we need to make sure. So what I'm hearing from you is that if we're just changing the date and saying that it was reviewed, that we put a list together of all the policies that we reviewed that we currently have, and when it was reviewed, and it doesn't just inform the committee. That's what you're saying.
Well, or it goes in the, sort of like the first part of this agenda where it's more
And the other ones
like,
that- these are the ones that were just
it's very simple, or
reviewed.
the adjustment is the date.
Okay.
Because I want to like do a thorough job, but then it's like I'm trying to fish through what's new, what's not new, what's this and that. So that would be my,
Okay.
the content, well, I don't think was any different. I would think we want to go through them all.
Yeah, I was just
Eventually
gonna,
once.
what do you want to do, Tom? Do you want to go through,
So the EEAA policy, EEAA, again, their policy was just basically boilerplate from the Mass law. The committee had different parameters for transportation. We're just keeping the existing parameters with no change to those, however, updating the language before or after, including the legal references down below. to Mr. Aguirre's point, no change in the intent of the language, just updating the references around the parameters the committee has set.
Okay, so, go ahead,
I was
Mary.
gonna say, so for the meeting on Monday, when we refer these, we will create another cluster that says the ones that we just updated this year, reviewed and updated. We'll create that bucket so that people know.
Yeah, I think it's clearer, but in this one, we had talked about the mileage and to make it to be what we did.
Parameters, yep.
So what is different than, like, so the
The state
page,
reg is 2 miles, right?
so when I'm looking at this, I'm just looking at, so page 1, you know, the walkers and riders, page 1, walkers and riders, page 2,
Yeah, I see.
walkers and riders, page 3. What are we actually voting on?
The language on page 2 is the language from the existing policy. It's been inserted in between the first and last paragraph, and the legal reference is updated. That's it.
So the legal reference is just copied from the first page? From the
Yes.
state law,
Yes,
which we don't follow,
We didn't have
It
that
wasn't- it
listed
wasn't
in our
on our
current
policy.
policy.
but we don't follow
That
it,
paragraph,
right?
that was the updated policy from
But if I looked at
MASC.
MGL 7178, 7176, 70, that legal reference, is that the reference that's on the front page?
Right. This
That's
is
what
the new
legal
updated
reference is to
policy.
the front page.
But this on page 2 was the current policy, which did not include the legal reference. That legal reference was added to, we still have the bullet, the things in the middle, and we have the legal reference before and after. That was, now it shows the whole thing.
Okay. So
Okay.
if we go to the first page, it says
Yeah.
walkers and riders. Grades 1 through 3, students living more than 1 mile from school. Grade 4 to 6, students living more than 1.5 miles from school. 7 through 12. And then it has a legal reference here. I'm assuming that in that legal reference, it says that's what you have to do by law, is what's listed there.
minimum. The committee has an enhanced policy. You actually surpass what's required by law.
Right, but then I would say that the legal reference is not valid.
Well, we
I
do
mean, it-
comply with all the elements of the legal references. In some cases, we surpass it.
And how would I know that from here?
Because the policy is in compliance with the law. That's the site that MASC does. And then the committee has voted to enhance that. Also, our grade breaks don't coincide with what's in the original policy from MASC.
Mhm.
We go pre-K through 5, and then we go 6, 7, 8 at the middle school level. And
So when we last met to go over the policies, one of the suggestions was to make it clear for the whole committee to know what we're voting on, what we're not. So I think when we move these forward, another way to make this clear is to put a paragraph together that says, file EEAA, here's the reason why. So we extend beyond the school, the state law, this, we're just explaining what this is, because it does beg a question of which one as we see these three, they don't all go together per se, so you're trying to make it simpler, which I agree with. Just, I would say that for the committee to look at, to say, rather than just look at an agenda and the 3 pages, and it can be an explanation of why is, sort of like when there's a finance thing and Mr. Almeida does like a little 1-pager of item number 1, here's the story. We were over in custodians, this makes more sense. This is so that this is actually just telling the committee that we exceed the state law minimums. And that's a vote of the committee. So when we vote, we know we're voting to actually exceed, not
Right.
go below. Just a clarifying piece, I think, with each of these might help. And as we go through the questions now, I guess I will tell you whether we should clarify or not, that's all.
Okay.
You want to go through, maybe not,
Yeah.
if you want to go through more of these, but what more importantly, the ones that you added?
Yeah, we are going to, we do
Okay.
need to get through, we revised our
Revised them.
attendance policy, and we're adding, we're proposing to add a fraternization policy. Certainly, we're still vetting that through legal counsel, but that is something that we're proposing to add to the school committee. So I don't know, I mean, certainly do you want us to, I understand what Mr. Aguirre is saying, that we need to put almost like a memo together with the reasons why we changed something, or we added or took away something, to explain this batch.
Yep.
What the changes were. I think that's what you're saying, right? With an
Yeah, as we're
explanation.
going through this
Yes.
meeting, the purpose of a subcommittee is to
Exactly,
get
to get
this thing out.
feedback.
So
Exactly.
I would say we go down the things, get the feedback, but then don't just give the same
Right.
like folder to the full committee.
Right.
It'll make the meeting on Monday go a lot smoother if we know,
Yeah, we'll make
here
the
was what the
revisions.
question was, here's what the thing is. You might say, this makes sense, we need to think about it again like we did the last time.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm really interested in the next one.
So go ahead, Tom.
So as Maria just pointed out, the next policy, we're actually waiting for legal to clear. That's the one you just
Yep.
referred to.
Okay.
This is the first time the committee will be seeing it, so, but I do, before we take a vote of the whole committee, I did want to get it in front of you, and I'd ask that you just hold maybe questions, and then we ask, we wait for legal to clear it before the whole committee take a vote on implementing it.
Go ahead, Mr. Aguirre.
So I'm reading this policy and I'm trying to figure out why we need it. And as I'm reading it, it seems to me that some of the stuff that's in it is just a clear cut inappropriate behavior. So when it talks about fraternization is not allowed, prohibited, somebody with an employee who reports to a supervisor or administrator, or who has employment conditions that could be impacted by the supervisor or administrator. That tells me, by us having this new policy without any other background, that if that happened now, it's okay. So if we had a person, an employee, who had a relationship with a person who they report to as an immediate supervisor or an administrator, and has employment conditions that could be impacted by the supervisor, evaluation, promotional pay, differential, all that now it would be not okay. And I'm reading into that if it happened already, then there's nothing we can do about it.
I wouldn't say that's the case. Management always has the right to discipline employees appropriately.
Most school departments don't even have a fraternization policy. But we do have ethics and standards, and we act accordingly depending on professional behavior or, violations of, or infractions, like we do with any.
Right. Look, so you're saying you have the right. So we don't need this to take action.
Right.
So
But-
when I read in the prior paragraph, talking about staff working conditions, administrative, manual, supervisory, must be aware of relationships, how they affect the supervisor and administrator, an employee having a relation with their supervisor, or a supervisor having a relationship with somebody that they report to. The last sentence of this policy says, this conduct is unacceptable and the school department will take action accordingly. Is that happening now?
Yes.
They're taking action? In all cases of...
Whenever we take action that potentially has some exposure for either the district or the committee, we always act on legal guidance.
But it's not acceptable.
No,
You're not changing that.
no, not at all.
The part of, I guess, just notifying people that you shouldn't have this? That's what this is.
I would say this
Because
is
you have the right anyway.
correct.
So if this was going on, inappropriate behavior is going on, however that is, you have a right to just act on it. Find out, is it true? If it's true, you act on it in a timely manner.
Yes.
So this isn't necessarily a policy that's needed to take action.
No.
So what do we do? I think with those things being considered, I think we need to look at this policy even in a greater, to determine what it is and what it's not. So like if we look at it and say, this is the policy that's a new policy that says what I just read, doesn't mean that was okay if we didn't have this policy. the same behaviors. I think somehow in here it needs to be acknowledged that that's never been okay. And this is a clarifying, what I think I'm hearing you say is it's a clarifying of expectations, but it's not okay if it was happening before.
Right, and this is why we said we needed to vet it through legal, right? We want to make sure that our wording is precise and that we are very clear with our expectation. Yeah, you're right, it's not okay.
And if I can just add, I think there's another element that we also discussed about this is really surfacing our staff handbook to call out the policies that are most pertinent to the day-to-day functions and interactions within our community, so that we are calling out very explicitly from the very beginning of our interactions what we are about and what we aren't about, amidst all of the policies which we will hold people accountable to. But there are some that are of more heightened attention, knowing the impact that they have across our schools and to our district. So that was also part of our conversation when putting this together, is how do we leverage some of the most important things in our work to keep our school communities focused on teaching and learning as the priority with which we are the business of.
I just looked at there's a second page to this about an agreement, disclosure agreement, and I'm assuming that you're gonna do the same?
Yep.
So that-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where did that exist? Where did that come from?
That came from a number of different sources online. What it is acknowledgement and a voluntary disclosure form, which would hopefully set the table for somebody not claiming after the fact that it was a forced or inappropriate relationship, that's voluntary on the part of anybody that's participating in that relationship.
And who is it meant for?
The people participating in a potential
Employee,
relationship.
any employee.
And the reason we're also waiting for legal on that is because we don't want to give the signal that if you sign this, it's okay, because it's not okay.
Well, that's what so the first part that we were just talking about, if I was reading the first part, and then I had to read the second page, I said, well, but if I sign this, I'm okay?
No,
No, but we need to make sure
a
that,
mechanism for disclosure,
yes.
that's all that is.
But we need to acknowledge what's in the first part,
Mm-hmm.
about a supervisor not having a relationship with a subordinate.
Correct.
So that, I think, needs to be clear. I'm just looking at this now. It doesn't look like that's very clear. And enter into this relationship, I think that needs to refer to something else to say
That could
this
be
is.
between two employees where there is no supervisory relationship.
I understand that. That's what he's trying to disclose. What I'm saying is that we don't want to give the impression that it's okay for a person, if I'm supervising somebody, I shouldn't have a relationship with them to the point where now I'm going to evaluate them different, I'm going to treat his colleagues different like that. And the first page is trying to get to that, which we said we didn't need, but we can still act. It's the consensual relationship disclosure, I don't think explains that, is my point.
Okay.
I think it would need to clarify something to say, with this being said, you still can't have a relationship with a subordinate. I mean, anybody with half a brain would know that that's just not something that you do. And if you do that, you violate risking losing your job. I think that's a no-brainer for anybody. But it's sad to say we actually have to put some stuff in here to go by it. And then on the first page, the employees disregard or violate the policy are subject to progressive discipline consequences up to and including suspension or termination of employment. I think that language is a little contradictory in that progressive discipline implies that you wouldn't go to the highest level of which would be termination. But if you have certain things that are egregious, you would go to the right part. So if we have subject to progressive discipline, to me, when I'm reading this, that implies that you won't get the highest penalty. Like if I do progressive discipline in the school, it could go from a detention, in-school suspension, short-term suspension, long-term suspension. So there has to be some mechanism for the sake of there's certain things that you do. Don't go from detention to in-school. You earn.
But in the same
But
token,
is that progressive?
But in the same token, Mr. Aguirre, you have progressive discipline in school, but if a student were to do something violent or attack another student, you don't begin with a written warning or a verbal warning, you go to the appropriate measure. Even though progressive discipline exists, you go to the appropriate measure for the consequence, for the offense.
But it says that in those policies.
Mm-hmm.
So in the policy for something that's going to get to that level, I don't believe it would, if it does, it shouldn't, in my opinion, say progressive discipline. It just means you're subject to, you bring drugs to school, you're subject to a higher penalty right off the bat. And
It sounds like, so we'll have to look at the language to see, to leave.
And again,
that's
if you had something that was not egregious, but something that just caused a disturbance in the workplace, and it implied favoritism or something, I mean, there could be impressions that are taking place in the workplace. A progressive discipline might be a written warning the first time, or in the second case, something, not quite termination, but again, another stepped up level of discipline. So I think that it still gives management the right to react appropriately, depending on the level
yeah,
of
I
infraction.
think it needs, if you look at it and come to, if they said,
Yeah.
the lawyers say that it makes sense or it
Yeah,
does
if you
whatever.
remove the word progressive, perhaps that addresses
And if you look at it in the same vein, when you're doing something and if somebody lies, there's also pieces of it to deceive. So if an employee lies, now they're in trouble for lying. So if you not only did something that you shouldn't do, then you lie about something that you didn't do, it's like you just keep on adding up the problems. So I just think I get where you're coming from and you want to make sure, but whatever ways we have to explain that certain behaviors aren't tolerated, and when you violate those, there's a risk of termination, for real.
We'll look at the language.
So, thank you.
response. We had discussed earlier potentially going to the media policy on staff attendance earlier in the meeting, just because it was a little time consuming. Do you want to do that, or do you want to?
No, that's okay, we can keep rolling.
Okay.
Yeah, keep rolling.
You know,
All right. The online fundraising and solicitations, crowdfunding, which is something very common this day and age, is totally new. That's the suggested policy through NASC. We didn't have that in place, no one did, and obviously now, the world we live in, there needs to be something in place.
Can you just summarize what it is and whether you agree with it? Because just because MASC recommends it doesn't mean
Well-
universal agreement.
You're right, but we had nothing in place, and you know that we've had this discussion in school committee meetings, right, where people are going to Donors Choose or GoFundMe, raising money for classroom supplies, et cetera, and what this is putting some constraints on how people do that and how they have to answer to school administration. They have to disclose that they're doing that and give us a rationale as to why they're doing it. So, yeah, we agree with that. We think that that's something that needs to be in place. Just arbitrarily, they can't just, they have to submit something now, right?
So,
to
yeah.
us and say that they want to fundraise for a particular cause, and it has to be approved by the superintendent's office.
So they go to you
That's something
first.
that, yes, that has to be done before they do that, which is some of the issues that we run up against,
Yep,
right?
I don't
People are doing
disagree.
it without us knowing, and then we find out after the fact, oh, somebody took it upon themselves to do some Donors Choose or GoFundMe for markers when.
Right, no, I've been saying this for multiple years, so I appreciate you bringing it forward. When I'm looking at it just quickly, I think it shows like the principal needs to first approve it,
Mhm.
and then it comes to you, which I've been asking for a long time, so that we know. But sitting on the committee, knowing that we have resources, it really drives me
Yep.
up the wall when people are putting out things like I need to, get my classroom ready and stuff like that. Where, in my mind, when the old days, when we had no money and we were laying off staff, yeah, we had to try to get that. I think we should curb that back, and I think we should make an investment into providing a lot of these things so that it's not making the school department, both yourselves, the school committee, the mayor, looking like as if we're not supporting the schools. So I think this is tremendous.
Just to articulate a couple of different parts of the policy as well, at the bottom of the second paragraph, it also says that if you're going to crowd fundraise for any type of technology, that it has to be compatible with what the system uses. You can't bring in, for example, 5 iPads or something that require a certain kind of software that is not compatible, it either violates our firewall or does something inappropriate. Lastly, it does spell out that donations to the district belong to the district, they're received by the committee, and they belong to the district, they're the property of the district, despite the fact that they're going sort of outside of the lines for funding here. it does still belong to the school, so that people don't think that that's portable personal belongings that they could take to another.
There was, I think, protocols in this. I know they said this is not about like a brand new from scratch. There is protocols in Fall River Public Schools for this exact thing.
For
With
donations.
technology, with exactly what you just explained, because I'm recalling times when that happened. And there was policy or procedure, whatever, however it was, but there was like you couldn't use, whatever, you couldn't get iPads if you're using Chromebooks.
Right.
Things like that. So I recall that, and my wife did that when she worked in the school district. She got 5 iPads when she moved to another district. The incoming teacher got 5 iPads, or whatever it was at that time. But, so there was a policy of some type, but I think it's spot on
On
for
the
at least getting.
On the second page, when it talks about cross-references and references to other policies, that's where those tie-ins come in. That's really the work, some of the work that MASC does when they vet a policy, so that you can find those cross-references to the kind of things that you're talking about. So,
If, I might ask that, and it's not something that, if we can get a list from the principals of who has done this, and like,
Yeah.
just so we can get some data on it, to know how, I know the ones that I see on social media myself or whatever, but if we can get some data on, is this 20 things across the whole district? Is it 10? Is it at one school, not other school? Just a curiosity. Everybody's gonna have to follow this, but it might lend itself to us knowing which places maybe don't. You're a principal of one school and you support the classroom with X, Y, and Z for this, so the teachers wouldn't go with it. I'm a different person and I say, no, I'm spending it on something else. So if we look at the data and say one school or 2 schools are the ones doing this, I would then therefore ask, what's happening there different than the other places? Is it
Yeah, and I'll be
different?
honest, just thinking about it, putting my principal hat on for a second. Prior to this policy, there was nothing that required staff to tell you that they were putting these things out there. So I'm not quite certain how much of a pulse folks have on the depth of that. Because whether or not it might have been posted publicly, but if it wasn't posted publicly, there was no system that I ever had that said, you have to let me know if you're going out for classroom donations. I think this is another one of those policies that needs to live in the staff handbook
Yeah.
to really bring it alive for people, but to reiterate it to your point that we have resources, we are not in the same stone age as we used to be at. I just don't know necessarily that principals have a pulse on that because we haven't had a system of requesting that information. People just attempt to get what they need from their own networks and relationships to fill their classrooms when a need arises, right? So I mean, we can
Yeah, I
certainly
don't,
put it
even
out.
the
I just
past
wanna-
data, I would just say, I'm not telling you what to do, but like an email to from the
Yeah.
principals to the staff saying, please let me know if you did a GoFundMe over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
They'll tell you whether they did it. It's not like we can hold them to.
Well, Amy, did it happen a lot when you were at Henry Ward, or do you know? if it-
I mean, maybe in the beginning, just
Yeah.
because I didn't know I didn't, 6 years ago, we were in a different place financially too, right? But once things started rolling where the needs were being met, the requests were being met because the funds were here. Oftentimes, I would push back on people when they would put that out there, having heard the statements at school committee meetings, like, no, we don't need to go there, let's put a request in. And Kevin Almeida's been great in relationship to just my fluidity with my books and supplies money and really being able to be flexible as the year rolls for principals to meet their, priorities as they move along the school year,
Right.
as things come up. So I know I've spoken about that with my principal colleagues and with my mentor principals around, no, reach out to Kevin. They've got the funding, they can help you figure out a way to get your needs met. But I think it's become more of a traditional way of speaking among leadership where it wasn't that way necessarily in the very beginning, if I can be honest about it.
And superintendent, has it happened often, like in the
I think that.
past year or two?
I think that in the past,
Throughout the
it happened a
district.
lot more. I think that we have put parameters on. I've communicated with the principals consistently about your people should not be crowdfunding, and if they are, they should be meeting with you to talk about what it is that they're raising money for. Because for basic supplies, no one should be reaching out to the community because we have the means to do that. So we have communicated. I mean, there's always, you see that, there are always some, and sometimes there's, agencies or community partners that donate different things
Right.
or say, what do you need, and give it to them. But there's no reason for us to be going to Donors Choose to get markers and pencils
Right.
and crayons and stuff.
And keeping in mind, when we think about the community partner element of it too, it's a reciprocal relationship, right? Like, we are in the business of education and serving our students with the resources with which those community or agencies are built upon. When we think of just their philanthropic mission and vision,
Right.
we become the grateful recipients of that. But I look at in context to this, I look at that completely different as opposed to someone putting something out there to say, I can't get the money for this, help me get the money for that. That's a different request than what I've experienced when it comes to community partner donations and this reciprocal relationship from, merchandise or items and whatnot, right? So I do look at them a little bit differently.
Definitely not.
Right.
Yep.
One more thing
Oh,
on
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
So one other thing that drives me up the wall on this is that when we take donations,
Yeah.
when Nick Fisher was the superintendent here, which was a long time ago, the committee made a motion to create our own nonprofit, that we were gonna control some things so we don't have to use conduits and this and that for nonprofits, and I don't think we've done anything with it. So at the next meeting, I'd like an update on
Look
it.
into that.
Katie, you want to continue with, what are we on, the drug-free workplace?
There are elements in our policy that we want to keep. I'll spell those out. We'll note them accordingly for the committee to go. Our policy was quite long. The MASC is focusing simply on the elements that require somebody, if they're in trouble in the workplace, but we'll spell out the pieces that we want to keep from the 401 and make that clear for the vote.
Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
I know alcohol is yellowed out here, but I'm assuming that means it's in addition, but in no way is that implying that it's okay to bring alcohol to school.
Right.
So what would the penalty be for that?
I think that we would have to do the discipline piece. Somebody brought alcohol to school, that would be a problem. It's prohibited on school grounds, so.
Yeah, I'm just, I'm not looking for an
It
answer
could
per
be up
se
to-
right now,
yeah.
but it's begging the question of, we added it here. Now,
Mhm.
anybody with half a brain, as I said before, would know you don't bring alcohol into a school.
Mhm.
If we get information, we get proof that somebody brought alcohol into school, there should be a consequence for that.
Yep.
And for future, I'm just curious what the consequence would be.
We've terminated employees for that before. Without sharing any details, I can tell you that.
Yeah, just a one pager on the, answer the question of, if somebody did, this is what the thing is. And I'm not trying to say people have problems, substance abuse, I get all that stuff, but there has to be something of the sanctity of you don't bring alcohol into a school.
So, Tom, you want to go to the next one, employment of principals?
There's little difference between the committee and the other one. However, I think the modified version captures the intent of the committee a little bit more. You've set parameters for the contract for principals, and while you don't bar somebody from going outside of those parameters, if they do, they have to bring that to the attention of the committee. Otherwise, the superintendent hires and follows the direction of the committee with the parameters they've set up. Our previous policy was only 2 paragraphs and a sentence in between. It's a little better spelled out, articulated in the new one.
Go ahead, Kevin. Sorry.
I'd like to add to what we used to do with these contracts were when the end of the year come, whatever the timing was, there would be a dollar figure that this committee had to approve prior to the superintendent negotiating with individuals, so that we knew at least we were holding some sort of check and balance on how much was going to be spent. I'd like to see something like that added back in.
You give me parameters anyway.
Separate
Right,
from the
that's
parameters, but I'm talking about like a financial parameter, so I'm just gonna throw a round number out there
Yep,
that
yep.
said, for this body of 10 principals, 20 principals, you can't go over $50,000. So when you're talking to the principal, okay, this committee's giving me $50,000 to live within my ranges. I know I gotta live within those ranges or come back to the committee, have more. It helps us to
Or
at
you're
least
saying
have
the
a
total
sense
amount of,
of-
you have this
of-
to spend, so how you choose to spend it on
Is
the
your call.
percentage, but you
would
can't
at
go over
least,
this
in
amount.
the old days, we at least had some sort of parameter of how much money we were going to allot towards that. So then you negotiate down, stay within that thing until you felt, listen, I need
Go
to
back
go a
and
little
say.
over it because of X, Y, and Z. Then it just tells, it basically gives the committee some authority on controlling the budget, which is part of our purview, better than you just spend what you want in it. And then, not that you would spend it willy-nilly, but you know what I'm saying. I think the committee should have a say in all budget line items. If we give you a number, live within it, then
So we have to articulate that line in there.
well, it says about timing, when I was reading it, it showed about like what goes first, something, there's like a step order. Principal, like we tell you what the range is or whatever, then you negotiate it, rather than have you had negotiate with somebody and then go back to us after the fact, and now it's a rubber stamp. Because now you say, well, I already negotiated with Joe, or Johnny, or whoever the name is, and then it should come before.
Okay, so the
My only
paragraph.
my only question to that becomes the time between school committee meetings where principals need to be hired, negotiations need to be made, and then does that hold up the hiring of principals? Because I just want to make sure we don't box ourselves.
This is, I'm referring to increases.
Right, renewals.
Oh, renewals.
So,
I'm sorry,
yeah, so
I'm
like
sorry,
that,
okay.
I
it'll
know
be
what you're
like
saying.
6 months early when you
Yeah,
start
absolutely.
negotiating.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Renewals.
we already have the range for
Gotcha,
new
yep.
hires, this is for continuation.
For continuation beyond that, gotcha,
Yeah.
okay. Because you understand where I'm coming from, right? If that happens beforehand and that was part of the initial onboarding language, that would slow things up. But then,
Yeah, and
you
then
know,
we have like, we've done a better job, I think, of having some control over the silos of money. So there's a line item that Mr. Almeida creates that says you can't go over that line item.
Yep.
But there's usually enough money to give you some.
yeah,
So we'll rework those paragraphs to make sure that it indicates the order, is what I'm hearing for feedback from that, right?
and to be specific around
Yes,
contract
and-
extensions, right? Like, because that's what we're talking about for that particular piece that Mr. Aguilar is referring to. It's for contract extensions, or renewals rather, probably a better word, renewal. At the point of renewal, you would provide a forecast of total financial increase at the principal level to clear with you guys
Yeah,
beforehand.
and
to then
I
go
think
back
it's a
and
good policy to
negotiate.
have
Yeah,
across
yeah.
all. We do that with the individual contract people. We've gotten away from
That's
it.
nonsense, yep.
But we used to always have a number that said, okay, we're gonna give you some latitude to do what you need to do, but you can't go over a certain number. We used to do that with everything, and I think that worked out much better than being shocked by, oh, well, how did this happen?
Okay.
Next policy on the list is GCF, professional staff hiring. It's very similar to our current policy, although there's some languages added to bullet number 3, and that just gives the committee the ability to direct the superintendent about the makeup of those, of a screening committee for those positions that the committee controls. Examples are assistant superintendents, CFO, nurses, attendance officers. If the committee wishes to have a representative screening committee and wishes a certain membership on that committee, they can do that to the superintendent.
Which we do now, but
Right.
it codifies it,
It
yes.
actually just puts our practice
Yeah.
into policy.
Okay.
So on this, this hasn't been followed with fidelity over the years. So that's sort of where I come from as far as having some issue with it. So
The
if,
committees for hiring, you mean?
yeah, so I've served on several committees myself that I was asked to serve on. Other members of the committee have been served, over the years, have been asked to serve on other committees to say, we're hiring blah, 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 we want to put a person in. And this is basically prohibiting that practice, but it's not calling it out.
It doesn't prohibit that practice, it just gives the practice, it just defines which practice that the committee has control over, that's all, which is already in place, it's the practice.
What it says is that committee can make suggestions in regards to setting up a committee. We set up committees now, and we try to have representatives. This is
Gives you
not-
more control
this
over
is-
those
yeah.
positions that you actually make the hire on.
This is about the committee saying, you're hiring this person
On
to put a
an
committee
assistant
together.
superintendent,
Yeah, you
the
need to put a
positions that
committee
fall under
together.
our purview.
Correct.
I understand that. But it's silent when the title says professional staff hiring. Talks about at the top about the superintendent, persons they can delegate responsibility, personnel needs of the school district to locate suitable candidates. Where in here does it say that the school committee will have a representative or can have a representative or not?
It
only
doesn't.
says, so I think it needs to clarify it.
So are you saying that for every committee, I need to have a member of the school committee on?
Or
Is that
not.
what you're saying?
Or not, I'm just saying,
So you can say, you could
Articulate
say,
it.
may choose to, how do you want us to word that? Like,
Oh,
I know what you're saying. You're saying that the school committee members can sit on those hiring committees is what I'm
we
hearing
have
you
in the
say.
past.
Right.
So what I'm saying is when we take this policy, the new policy, which I'm assuming is the one that has the yellow at the top and the bottom.
Correct.
We're creating a policy on professional staff hiring.
Yep.
The only thing where it talks about school committee members being on positions, on search committees, screening committees, is that bottom sentence that says, positions where the hiring authority rests with the school committee. It doesn't, it's silent to the other piece, but the whole policy is about professional staff hiring. At the beginning where it says I think it's highlighted because it's new, it is the responsibility of the superintendent or persons to delegate responsibility to determine the personnel needs of the district, whatever. So I think it needs to be clarified. Are school committee members gonna go on it? Not go on it? It shouldn't be just whenever. It's my.
But right now, it's just at the discretion of the superintendent.
Right.
That's correct.
I think that it's one of those things, right? If you're going to say, if we're going to make a policy and say that for every single hire, you're saying it's been, I personally, sometimes it's a conflict, right? Because if I'm hiring an assistant superintendent and you're going to vote on it, I feel like it's a little bit of a thing. If let's say I have both of you on that committee, along with principals and a whole bunch of other people, like, you will have an edge over your people and you're voting on that. So I think that it depends on the position, right?
Well,
I don't know.
keep
I mean,
it, I would
let's
just keep it at the discretion of
we
the
can talk that through.
superintendent.
I'm just trying to figure out how, I want to make sure that we do things without doing things the right way, right?
I understand.
And so if we're going to say that school committee member needs to sit on every single hiring committee, okay, so
That's
for
not what
all
I'm saying.
positions or for
That's not what I'm
certain
saying.
positions?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay,
You're
I'm
saying-
saying
you're saying
take
can or
advantage of
may.
the opportunity when we're looking at a new policy
yeah.
to clarify so there's no confusion over what can and can't happen, is what I'm saying.
Right, and
The
I
piece
hear
of-
you.
When we vote on an assistant superintendent, just being transparent,
Yep.
if I didn't sit on an assistant superintendent committee to vet the candidates, to know, ask the questions, to get an impression of the person, to talk to other professional colleagues and to work through the thing, I wouldn't be in the same position if I wasn't on that committee. Because then you make the recommendation, however, let's say I'm not serving there. You submit a number, we do an interview supposedly in public.
Right.
We don't even ask questions of the interview candidates. It's a rubber stamp. We don't even get to see the other candidates. We don't get to see the whole list of who applied. There's a flaw in the whole
Yeah,
thing. So in the ones that you have listed here at the end, for the positions we have, somebody can ask you to be on or whatever, the committee can, I find value in that. I find value in other members sitting on it to know I've learned a lot about people and the candidates and
Right.
so it's a benefit to be on those committees. I've also served on others
Plus-
when asked to be on, that it's been valuable as well. But what I'm saying is, this is your opportunity now as a superintendent to take a very clear stand on what's going to happen with the other hiring. I don't want to serve on all these. I'm not suggesting that the school committee serves on them, but I'm just saying, put whatever your feeling is, talking to your team. If it's that the school committee members will sit on only the positions that they have within their jurisdiction, 2 members or whatever, because you can't do a quorum. If that's the policy, fine. Then in the same policy, I think it should say, the other stuff is not. Period. Then you get off of. You don't have anybody wondering.
but we can clarify that every single position we need to have a committee together. Compile.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, I
I just think.
together.
I think what's happened is, without saying it, without articulating it, we had gone in the past for school committee members to sit on when it was a reason to do because of their interest, likes, whatever else. Then that same position now gets another committee for the same position again. No school committee members are on it.
Yep.
So that's confusing to me because I say, wait a minute, I was good enough to be on for that position a year ago or 2 years ago and take my time and study the candidates and ask tough questions and do what I needed to do 2 years ago. Now the same exact committee's formed now. There's maybe half the amount of people and no school committee members on it. That's where I'm coming from, is that I feel like the unwritten policy now is that school committee members aren't going to be part of it unless it's this. And if that's fine, I would just articulate it so we know what's happening.
Right.
and then we vote yes or no.
Okay.
Next one, Tom?
This
Philosophy
is,
is
again,
separate.
pretty clean one, GCIA. Our previous policy had 5 bullets in it. The last 2 items that were left out of the MASC policy are not of any consequence, but I think it's not objectionable and it's a benefit to us to have them in, so to keep the existing policy, just update the reference.
Any questions?
We'll put that on there.
Probably should have been on the first part,
Yep, exactly, that's what we'll add it to that first part.
because that's not really doesn't sound like that's
Again, I'm
controversy.
just changing, if you looked at it and saw 3 bullets and 5 bullets, say what's changed, it really could go.
But at some point, we gotta trust you too, that
Yep.
when you say it's not anything pertinent, like we gotta buy that too, so it just eliminates it from it.
Field trips, Tom?
The next policy, I think, captures the will of the committee. The policy down below, the paragraph below number 5, if you could just go through that, I believe that's intended to capture what the committee was trying to distinguish on field trips without relinquishing any of their authority, just given the ability for the superintendent to be a little more responsive in those short notice situations where the other things are involved.
It's good to me.
Tom,
This was just the one that made no sense when
Right.
they're going to play a game and they gotta, like,
Or
so.
scrimmages.
Yes.
Scrimmage, last
but
minute
what,
scrimmage.
did we limit it to just Rhode Island?
Right,
Yeah.
because it was, if you recall, there was a situation where it was a scrimmage in Portsmouth. and
Yeah.
Last minute, can do it, yes.
All right, Tom.
Okay. JH is the student attendance policy. It's listed in the MASC manual as student absences and excuses, and then it's been updated by Dr. Bronhardt and her team.
which is in the back, if you noticed. I tried to just be really clear with where the modifications were across the rather lengthy document back, but yeah.
Any questions, Mr. Aguirre?
Can you just, a quick summary of what the changes were?
So there really aren't any changes outside of language changes. When I had the opportunity to meet with the attendance officers back in the spring, we felt as though the policy in its 8-page document was too lengthy and too long and had some repetitive language that made it confusing for families to follow. And so then thinking about also, being more explanative around unexcused absences, excused absences, the buyback policy as it relates to the secondary level particularly and how that's connected to grades. So really, we just tightened up the language, made it more parent-family friendly. And then as you noted, if you can notice that the blue is in the policy where those changes were made, the wordsmithing specifically. And then I took the time to chart it out for you to be able to see what was added and what was deleted in the rationale on the right column
At the very end.
at the very end. Because I didn't want to give you 2 8-page policies to have to go back and forth, so I tried to create the chart to show you. The yellow is where we removed language that we felt was redundant and the rationale for that. And then when I did cross-reference this policy in its final version with that of MASC, all of the key primary areas were included within our policy, so nothing was omitted.
Good, Kevin.
Just, this is probably the most complicated of the bunch that's here today. And I commend you for, this is how a policy should go. Here's what it's clear. The committee wants to know, why does it say what are unexcused absences? We wonder why. The comment on the right says, newly proposed language to explain through most relevant examples what is in, this is how a policy should be, tweaked, vetted, so we know exactly what it is, very clear for anybody to see, so kudos to Ms. Bernhardt. The attendance policy at the end, is that just for us, the last,
That was the old language, that was the original policy
Like this
that we
one here?
started from, correct? Just for you to have as a cross-reference point if you needed it. But that's where it started from. And so now this is the piece that we're looking to get translated and then publicize out and then create one more quick reference sheet for all staff and buildings to be able to use with families and with students.
yeah, no, it makes sense. My only question is on that, and it might be a protocol instead, in the policy, it used to say students absent, phone call will go home.
It's still, yep.
I say it in there somewhere, but it wasn't tweaked, it was just taken.
we just tightened that up as well, so that if you notice, if you go, I think the last 2 pages of that first piece, the tiers are still listed within it. And then we got really specific about some of the tiered pieces were not really realistic in the original policy, and we knew point blank it was not happening in buildings. When we think about the systems that were then employed, after speaking with the attendance officers and cross-referencing this with principals in the spring, folks felt as though the actionable steps that are in there are manageable. This past week at our Admin Institute, just today alone, we've begun really digging deep into what are the systems around attendance, looking at the investment that we've made in the Fall River Public School as it relates to the SEL support staff in our buildings, and really working with schools to lay down some high expectations around attendance, and some unapologetic expectations going into next school year, because if our kids are not in school, nothing else we do matters. So I just want you to know, like, the tiered piece was shared already in sort of hypothesized language because we had to come before the committee, but ultimately there are no major changes. It's more about the system we use to affect the policy.
Yep, and the only thing I would ask is that we get a simpler version of what that protocol looks like. Would be like even, here's the 5 steps, just so that everybody's on, we've said it, I've asked you that in public meetings, you've told everybody, you gotta follow the policy. Then we have cases that are not, so I think you're on the right track trying to make sure everybody is, but a simple, like,
Yep.
something to say, here's what happens, kids absent. Somebody asks Mr. Hart, myself, any other committee members, how do we track the attendance? What do we know?
Yep.
Go to that thing and say, look, the first step is this, second step is that. So when the parent calls us and says, nobody's contacted my student who has been absent for 3 weeks, we know this is the policy, send them your way, send them to the principal, but this should be followed. That's what I'm looking for, something as simple as that. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, want to go to the
Student dress code.
student dress code?
So the student dress code, the suggested policy updates language from the Mass General Laws, they talk about language called the Crown Act, which basically just emphasizes the right of free speech. However, I do suggest that the committee keep the bold section at the bottom of our policy, which basically just says, when it comes to dress code, any manner of dress which presents a health or safety hazard to a student or others, is potentially damaging to school property or distracting to the process, is prohibited. It just gives us a little more teeth in terms of the ability to control things that really shouldn't be happening. The MASC policy leans a little more towards the rights of free speech. However, we're not trying to infringe on that. We're just trying to go in the opposite direction and say that there is some consequences for
Right, so
interest.
what I guess doesn't really bother me, but I get confused sometimes when you have the dress code and it's not enforced. So, I mean, it just, sometimes it's not enforced at all. What happens then when it's not enforced?
Well, I think that we have defiance from adults as well as from kids
Oh,
in regards to the dress code. So certainly, that doesn't mean that it wasn't addressed, but I think there are times when somebody, I've gotten calls from parents who was very vocal about it and said, we can't have a dress code. We can, because we checked with our attorney, and what we have to do is we have to make sure we enforce it the same way for every student.
Right.
We can't just enforce it for some students and not others. It has to be enforced across the board.
Yeah, and I'm not saying
for
it
everyone.
happens often, but there are
No,
times,
I
there
mean-
are incidences when I'll get a call from a parent. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't gotten one in a while, but they're not enforced, like you said, across the
Yeah.
board.
Yeah.
That's all.
Can I ask for which will clarify what Mr. Hart asked for, the number of dress code violations in all schools? It should be coded in X2 and readily available. Thank you.
All right, Tom, student publications?
The second policy, the existing policy, excuse me, the third paragraph down, I suggest we keep. It just says that student publications will be encouraged to comply with the rules of responsible journalism. Students shall affix their names to articles or editorials written or contributed by them. It just basically says you're going to follow the same rules that we expect professional journalists to do, and the rest of the policy is unchanged. So it's just that third paragraph that I suggest we retain.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So the page 2 of this student publication says adopted 2010. The front page says updated 2021.
Correct.
And then we're getting to it now, it's 2023,
That's when it was released by MASC to us.
in 2023.
Yes, it came in this package of 85 or 90 policies that
I'm just noticing the
the
2-year,
reference, yeah.
the 2-year reference, like I would say that would mean it's updated in if we got it in 2023,
Yep.
it makes it look like as if we didn't do it for 2 years, so. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, co-curricular and extracurricular activities?
Hang on 1 second, I just misplaced my paper. You'll note that the MASC policy has 3 bullets, the Fall River policy has 5 bullets. The last 2 bullets, actually the first 2 bullets are the ones that were added by the committee. It just says it should be a collaborative process and it should have a complementary relationship between the homeland community. And the second bullet says that we would welcome parent assistance and planning activities. So it just has to do with community input, those 2 items, really the nature of the co-curricular and extracurricular activity.
Questions, Mr. Ryan?
So this, which one, so we're going with the one that, the second page?
I would say the committee wants to retain those two
Mhm.
expressions in bullet 1 and 2.
Just, not about the content, just the, so I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this. How do I know which one, short of what he just said? So, the recommended policy is this one? Just for, like,
Consistency
ease
across
of-
the board,
yeah, so like-
always that.
here's what they recommended, here's what we recommend, and then it makes it simpler to know.
Okay, Tom, student activity accounts?
That's actually
Sure, I'll
a
take it.
finance question for Ken.
So the updated policy by the MASC is what we're going with here. And the policy by the updated policy talks about what's supposed to happen with graduating class funds and student activity accounts. It talks about the procedure and what to do there. It talks about what happens with inactive student activity accounts and what happens at that point. And in addition, it talks about student activity deficits and how those are handled. So those are all items that were not originally disclosed in our policy. So I'm recommending that we move forward with this policy.
Mr. Aguirre?
So
Yeah.
the one that's, I guess it's the same, it says 2021.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, ours said 2010, so I feel like we've been sort of not adequate with keeping on top of it, but the piece of in the note, it said all audit will be audited. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it basically said that it'll be, is that happening?
So I can tell you that procedures have changed over the years since I've been here. So when I first came on board, there used to be individual student activity accounts, and they all used to be held at the schools. And so we moved away from that, shortly after I got on board, and we've made the process now centralized. So every single school has a savings account. The high school has a lot more because they have a lot of clubs that go on at the high school. But we'll call them organization, has its own student activity account. And whenever the bills are paid out, the schools will submit all the bills directly to, in our office, to Stacy, who will review every bill to make sure that it's appropriate to be paid out of the student activity account. And once that's done, it's then processed and paid, and, it's paid pretty timely. But our controls are a lot better, I would say, than they ever used to be, so.
So, is it audited or it's not?
It's reviewed by the auditors every year.
But I'm just looking at the
As part
language
of
here to
the
say,
audit.
I can agree with what you're saying, it's different than it used to be. But if I'm just looking at what it
I
says
can
here,
tell you that faithfully, I haven't audited it myself,
but is it required? That's so I'm just looking at if we did the 2010 one is old, we're gonna get rid of that.
Yes.
If we now adopt this one here, in the policy that we're gonna vote to approve, it says, DESC audit guidelines for student activity accounts require an annual audit, first sentence.
Yep.
So
And
are we
the-
gonna
and-
have to
and
do
this-
that?
In this year, I'm waiting for our auditors to finalize the audit. We gave them the information, and we're waiting for them to finalize.
So it's okay to keep that, so we're gonna audit every single one of those little accounts every year
It's,
by DESI
The-
rules.
so what they require is that me, myself being in this position, that I review 1 or 2 student activity accounts a year. And so I have to do that every 3 years. And as part of the audit, the student activity accounts are reviewed. It's not required that we have a full-scale audit of the student activity accounts every year, but the auditors that we have recommended that.
Yeah, I'm only looking at it as, I'm not suggesting that you're doing anything wrong or anybody is. But the first sentence, I'm still having a hard time with the first sentence saying that they require an annual audit.
It also says in the last line, districts with large numbers of schools may rotate the schools through the audit process. Right, so which gives us, that's exactly what Kevin was just saying, that you can do some each year, but there has to be audits every year.
As a regulation.
Right.
I mean, personally, I would strike that. So I don't think the benefit of having that in our policy does anything other than bind you in the district, because
That's fine.
you have to file, but you have to file DESI audit, like you have to file the DESI rules. So this is saying we're gonna follow the DESI rules, but it's saying it in a more confusing way.
Correct.
If we just scratch it out, then you don't have to worry about this, and we say, Mr. Almeida, you following the DESI rules? Yep, okay.
That's fine.
Whereas, otherwise you'd say, oh, where's the audit? What is the audit? What does it look like? What?
That's fine.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm always trying to help you.
I appreciate it.
Okay, public gifts to the schools.
Public gifts to the schools.
We had physical restraint.
Physical
Oh, I'm sorry, I
restraint.
missed that.
Physical
My
So
fault.
physical restraint, this first page actually just kind of calls out, you know, the line between corporal punishment and restraint, and physical, spells out the practice of mechanical restraint and physical restraint. Mechanical restraint is prohibited, physical restraint under certain conditions is allowed. All of the documentation you see on the back is the product of Michael Joyce's review last time. Those are all policies and procedure I think the committee would want to keep. So we're suggesting that that we keep the documents and the exhibits that are attached, because it spells out some of the procedures that are followed by the district in order to stay in compliance with the state regs. So while they give their updated policy in the first 2 pages, I think we want to stay with the stuff underneath and just, you know, reformat it so that it doesn't have the look of the handbook underneath, but it is the policy.
So there's a difference between policy and procedure.
Yep.
So if this is going in our policy book,
Yep.
personally, I think we should put policy.
So,
If we have a procedure manual that the principals use and the administrators use, that's different.
so there's a way to do that in your policy manual without changing the policy. What you do is call it an exhibit or a reference. You add the word E or R to the end of it. That's the way MASC suggests you do it. And we have examples of that from previous policies we've passed. So that distinguishes between what's policy and what's procedure. The procedural stuff is just called out, this is the procedure this time. An example would be our use of schools policy, where we have a price list for certain rentals, et cetera. We can change that and update that from time to time. That's the procedural piece, but the policy is in
Yeah.
place.
My only point is that's why our policy manual is this thick when it doesn't need to be. Because this is the policy right here, the first 2 pages that you're asking us to recommend. This is 5 times as many pages of procedures, not in the policy. That's how, I'm not disagreeing with what's in it. I'm assuming that Ms. Obenchain is probably the lead person on
Yep.
restraints. I'm sure she looked at this to make sure that it's good, but the policy manual is too big, in my opinion. Move on.
Okay, now it's public gifts to the schools.
The only piece that's called out in ours versus theirs is that if the gift is going to involve change in school plans or sites, that it has to come before the school committee. So, and I suggest we keep that.
I'm looking at the ones that says student fees, fines, and charges.
Okay.
These are the next ones on my list, but they're not listed on
That
the
wasn't
agenda.
listed in the agenda.
Okay, I'm not sure why that was excluded. Last month, or the month before, Scott Cabral came to you with a price list on, similar to the discussion we just had, a price list for those items that there would be costs to the students, power cords, things that they might break, technology items, et cetera. What I would suggest we do with the policy of student fines and procedures is refer to an exhibit, which can be updated, again, a price list of things. That way, if we switch a piece of equipment and it becomes a more costly item to replace, or a less costly item to replace, we can do that without having to change the policy. So the policy itself was okay. What I would just suggest we do is have an exhibit or a reference to a separate price list, which could be updated in the student handbook if need be. It doesn't necessarily have to say the policy.
Wait. I'm seeing the 3 pages, I'm just confused again, but we're talking about page 3, right? The last page, there should be a reference sheet, that's the one you recommended?
Yes.
When we do the new one, we should put the recommended policy first and then the old policy after, so that the committee knows that all the ones that are first are the ones that we're recommending.
Just one other thing to call the committee's attention to. In the new policy, it's suggested in paragraph 3, it's a second paragraph below the bulleted items. There's a line over to the right in the last line that says, includes a denial of participation in extra class activities and graduation exercises and activities while the student is enrolled in the district. So if there was some significant unresolved matter, it does give the committee some protection that, you know, the administration can act on that without being in violation of a policy.
Bottom line is, you gotta, if you damage something, you owe us money, you gotta pay it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't go to anything, but that has to be with fidelity
Enforced.
enforced.
Okay, public complaints?
Public complaints, I
Sorry,
had
can I interrupt for a
Yeah,
second?
go ahead.
The public gifts to schools policy, like, you said it was updated for what the committee wanted.
Last page.
KCD, that's the one. Hang on a second. There's a line in our policy, right below the first paragraph, that says gifts that involve changes in school plans or sites will be subject to the school committee approval. That's just to prevent somebody from saying, hey, donated an apple tree and you're gonna put it someplace. It's gonna be approved if it's gonna be something that's a significant change. I'm donating a piece of equipment that we may not want on the school grounds or something.
We've updated by vote of the committee what gets accepted and not, like, how it comes before us. So I think that now that we're doing this, we should put the language in to acknowledge the prior vote. So we voted to say, like, if you would have to, we'd have to accept everything over 100, 500, whatever the number was that we used, should go in here. Because it says it'll be accepted, and then you would read that to mean you gotta bring that to the committee to get accepted. So if there's $14.85 from selling Durfee t-shirts, it shouldn't have to come, there's a number, I don't know what it is, but it should come.
Isn't it 50?
I don't know if it was 100, was it 50?
I think it's
Anything
100.
over, I thought it was 100.
We got rid of something because
Yeah,
it was
it
like,
was,
you
because
would have
it
to
was
read.
$17
You
or
would,
something,
right,
yeah.
so
$100.
whatever it is, it should be
Yeah.
reflected in the policy.
Yeah,
And we went by what the state
Right.
rule law is, I think, so yeah, so it's 100. Okay,
KE, public complaints.
Yep.
The only thing it did suggest was that the complaints be in writing, which is in the second paragraph below the bulleted items.
And this is what you recommended in the first page?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that, Madam Superintendent?
but I do think that we need to have a formalized system, because anybody can call me and say, hey, Dr. B's not doing her job. I mean, we need to take them, it's different levels of complaints, right? But if something's gonna be investigated, I do think that we need to have something in writing. I usually say to people, all right, let's put it in writing so that we can launch an investigation. I do think that that needs to happen.
So, the way I'm reading this now, complaints about school personnel will be investigated fully and fairly,
Mhm.
period. Next sentence. However, before any such complaint is investigated, the complainant must submit their complaint in writing.
Yep.
That's what the new policy is recommended. And based on the prior nonsense that we had to address with the prior superintendent, this is not okay, in my opinion,
Mhm.
because you have people that can act inappropriate to other people that might not feel like they need to make a complaint. So if somebody makes a complaint, there's a way to write that everything will be fully investigated, but we can only do something as much as we know, or whatever. Like, there's a level of, by putting however, before any such complaint is investigated, the complainant must submit their complaint in writing, I think is a little too,
Okay.
the tenor of what you want to get is, If you wanna file a complaint, put it in writing. Somebody could file a complaint to you as the superintendent that says, you know, I'm a teacher and I'm being inappropriate with kids, whatever it is. Something,
Right.
whatever. If this is the policy, then you're saying, I'm not investigating them unless you put it in writing. You know, I think it's just going, I understand what you're trying to get at, but I just think if we're making policy, then it's an absolute when you put the word must. And there's situations that are taken much more serious if you put a name behind it, have you gone to the principal, like all those pieces that we talk about. But if somebody's doing something egregious like the old superintendent was, and people verbally say, or if people even legally verbally see, if an administrator sees another administrator harassing somebody, treating them inappropriate, there's no complaint needed. It's our duty in the law that we have to investigate that situation. But if I read this, all employees would say, no, I can't do that because nobody wrote a complaint. So when superintendent was acting like a jerk, treating people like crap, oh, we see it, but we don't have to act because nobody filed a complaint. File a complaint. That's not fair, and that's not right. And I'm only using that as the most recent example of inappropriate behavior, and so I would be careful how, that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm not looking to stop it. We'll push these forward at the end, and then you do what you gotta do before the final one. If that comes in with the full one, I am not voting for it like that, I can tell you that, but I wanna vote to support all these to go to the full committee.
Okay, and the last one, relations with non-public schools.
Our policy underneath was very simple. It was 2 paragraphs. The MASC suggested policy has a number of steps required for approval of a private school. I have to confess I was not aware of any of the 8 steps that they require here. And I suggest that they cite the law down below. Mass General Law, there's several that are referenced that the committee either get a little further legal advice or consider this, because obviously our policy was very bare bones before, based on what the MASC suggested, and now there's these 8 procedural steps that they suggest.
So on file, if they're using this law, which I don't know what the date is of the laws, but I'm assuming they're not recent. It says legal reference, it doesn't say what year those were.
Right.
So any new school that's come into the district over the last 15 years, the superintendent has a letter on file of their application to open a school? I don't think any came in since you've been here,
Yeah,
but
no.
like, that's what this is saying, right?
As I say, I have to plead ignorance on this because I wasn't aware of any
It
of
makes
these
it
pieces of
sound
law.
like that's.
But it does
how
make
it's
it sound
supposed
like
to
there's a procedure where the committee has to get involved in the approval process for the other school, so.
be. And they would have to make a presentation to the school committee
Right.
and all of that, so I haven't seen that happen in my
You
years
can-
here, period.
Maybe
Ever.
maybe check the reference.
We'll-
Like,
we'll-
it might be something that it's more recent than,
I-
like, check the legal references, because if that's the case, then the other schools haven't been doing what they need to do. I know about like Diamond, and when they add a new program, they gotta get approval from
Sure.
them, but I didn't know that either, but we should at least know.
And as I said, if you look at the policy that we had underneath, we got that from MASC. None of those steps are in there, so I'm kind of amazed at the expansion
The
of.
problem is, we also have, it says adopted December 13th, 2010. So we got 13 years of laws changing
Yep.
that we didn't, either they didn't tell us, we were asleep at the switch, or if people started submitting presentations to us, we would know.
Right,
So
right.
I think everybody missed it, but
Right,
it's 13
right,
years
right,
old,
right.
the last
Yeah.
time it's updated.
That's the last one I had on my list.
I make a motion to approve all these with some suggested
For the
revisions.
next meeting, for the full time. I second that. Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Mr. Hart?
Yes. Any new business?
I got one, two.
Go ahead.
I'd like to request, I don't know which policy it is, and I don't know where it is, but I'm sure there's a policy around theft. And if an individual takes school supplies or equipment and keeps them at their house, I'd like to know what the penalty is.
Motion to
There's gotta
adjourn?
be some sort of policy somewhere. Motion to adjourn.
Second. Roll call.
Mr. Agia?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Mr. Hart?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.